Thank you, Dr. Horgan and the Royal College of Physicians in Ireland for this opportunity to be part of the St. Luke's Symposium. It's a real honour. It's many years since I was a medical student at what was then UCG, and I've spent my career in a very different health system, one which for some is the best care in the world and which fails many others, and one whose inequities have been starkly exposed by this pandemic. And this crisis has also offered us examples of physician leadership, both inspiring and disappointing. Leaders like my med school classmate, Dr. Mike Ryan, who is leading the WHO effort on COVID, and Weill Cornell alum, Dr. Tony Fauci, who is the director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease. Leaders like this are unafraid to lean into uncertainty, they are candid, and they are comfortable leading on difficult decisions and difficult choices. Others, and Dr. Deborah Burke springs to mind, are struggling to maintain their professional reputation and relevance in a climate that is always dynamic and these days often toxic. In my own institution, we've seen inspiring examples of leadership from our trainees, taking charge of teams at the front lines that often include their senior faculty. But across the globe, we've also seen physicians frustrated at the lack of appropriate support or protective equipment, and yet feeling that they don't have the voice or the venue to articulate their concerns or effect system change. But wherever you practice, there is no doubt that physicians are an essential component of effective health system leadership. In a Harvard Business Review article entitled "Engaging Doctors in the Healthcare Revolution," Dr. Tom Lee from Partners, who I'm fortunate to have as a mentor, and Dr. Toby Cosgrave, who's the former CEO of Cleveland Clinic, state that any major initiative which they, the doctors, do not embrace is doomed. And in another HBR article, Stoller et al. Talk about the fact that physician-led health systems outperform on quality. Well, why is that? Toby Cosgrave attributes it to that peer-to-peer credibility. The idea that physician leaders have walked in our shoes. They have greater empathy and they engender more trust. And I think that that certainly resonates with many of us. That said, our training, which has been somewhat hierarchical, I think a lot less so, I hope a lot less so since I was a student, and often relies on this stereotype of the heroic lone healer, doesn't necessarily equip us for leading at scale. And Dr. Victor Zhao, who's the president of the National Academy of Medicine, considers that successful physician leaders who haven't received leadership training are what he would call accidental leaders. Now, there are people who think that leaders are innate, they're born that way, they can't be taught. Whatever you believe, there's no doubt in my mind that learning how to lead with influence rather than relying on traditional authority or hierarchy, understanding how to build diverse, effective teams is key to leading complex systems. And if we as physicians come to the leadership table ill-prepared and ill-equipped, we will fail to leverage what it is that we uniquely bring to the leadership process. I think that proactive leadership development is especially important as we seek to drive greater diversity in health system leadership. There's certainly some really inspiring examples of diverse leadership here in Ireland, but in general, health system leadership is a lot less diverse than the health system workforce, and generally less diverse than the population in general. And I think we have to be extra intentional about creating an opportunity for diverse leaders to actually bring their voices to the table. As Michelle Obama said in her book, Becoming, too many of us have gotten to the table and we're so grateful to be there that we don't feel comfortable speaking up or she said, shaking things up. There is also an apparent contradiction for physicians in leadership. As practicing physicians, we are advocating essentially for at an N of 1 for our patients. But when we lead systems or deliver leadership at a population level, we're making decisions and often difficult choices for large numbers, for an N of many. How do we navigate that transition? It's not easy, but I would argue that having a toolkit, being comfortable with the vernacular, and having confidence in one's ability to lead goes a long way. So how do we educate physician leaders? Well, does everyone need an MBA? I am certainly biased in that regard. My own business school journey was transformative. When I started at Columbia, I was already managing a large portfolio of imaging centers for my organization. I was managing a multi-million-dollar budget and a large staff of physicians and technologists and administrative colleagues. But quite honestly, I was winging it. I had taught myself Excel, and I was operating on a combination of personal passion and energy, which didn't always lead to the best decisions and certainly wasn't scalable. And at Columbia, I learned about getting stakeholder input and buy-in, developing influence, negotiating with my study group, none of whom were physicians. I learned about the importance of a diverse team with diverse skill sets, relying on my teammates, and really driving system change through teamwork. And I learned the financial anatomy and physiology of large organizations. What that's meant is that I can pretty much sit in any meeting and feel comfortable, and more importantly, I can feel comfortable saying when I don't know something and asking the questions that enable me to really understand the situation. And I certainly have felt that some physicians come to the leadership table without that comfort level. Now, the time and commitment for an MBA is just not practical for everyone. But what are the essential competencies that we need to imbue in physicians to make them feel comfortable leading? And how do we fit that into a crowded curriculum or a busy practice life? The work of organizations like this, the RCPI, is to be commended in terms of offering professional development opportunities to the community. But I would argue that even at the medical student level, helping our students understand how to build influence, how to lead with influence, and helping them understand how the money flows and how the decisions are made is an essential competency that they can learn. I will also say, though, that effective leaders do not only learn in the classroom, and that developing and maintaining a professional network of diverse mentors and sponsors will differentiate those of you who seek out that support. As I said, it's 100 years ago since I went to medical school, but I don't ever remember hearing the word mentorship. And its corollary, sponsorship, which is when a senior person actively seeks to open doors for you, too often look like its ugly cousin, nepotism. Going on in my career, though, I have been incredibly fortunate to avail of many mentorship and sponsorship opportunities. And most importantly, that's enabled me to pay those forward and do the same for others. Now, I know that the concept of networking can evoke a bit of a cringe, but it is so much more than the awkward exchange of business cards over warm white wine, and honestly, these days it's not that at all. For me, networking is looking at people in my organization and beyond who are doing interesting work and asking them for 15 minutes of their time to talk to me about their job, but also to talk to me about their career journey. And people are incredibly generous with their time, and they generally like to talk about themselves. And creating mentorship relationships and sponsorship opportunities for emerging leaders is really one of the most satisfying things that I do. So I would encourage all of you in senior leadership to share what you've learned. And for the junior faculty and physicians among you, start building your network. I think that mentorship is also especially critical for emerging leaders and leaders who don't fit the traditional stereotype. Coming into a leadership opportunity as the only woman, the only person of color, or the only person from a sexual minority carries with it a stress that most of us simply can't understand. And those sort of well-meaning exhortations to bring your authentic self to work simply don't resonate when you're the only person at the table who looks like you, the only person with the lived experience that you have, and when we know this, your latitude for failure is so much narrower than it is for people who come from the majority. So creating an inclusive, welcoming environment is key, and expanding our phenotype of what it is that health system leaders look like. I'm reminded of my first meeting of the American College of Radiology, and this is sort of a governance meeting with fairly strict seating by state, and I didn't know where I was supposed to sit, so I stood at the back, and I missed half the events because I didn't know what I was invited to. So fast forward 15 years or so, and I'm board chair, and I created a mentorship program for first-time attendees. I wanted them to spend as little time as possible wondering whether they belonged, and as much time as possible figuring out how they could contribute to the organization and what we were trying to do. And when I decided to sponsor a female physician to pursue an MBA, at the NUIG Cairns School of Business, it was important to me that she have a support network. And everyone I asked, from senior faculty to former health ministers to health system board members, all of them agreed enthusiastically, all wanted to mentor her and support her on her educational journey. And I think our first recipient of the scholarship, Orna, is in the audience today. Not only is she going to learn accounting and finance and marketing, but she is going to understand the perspectives of other leaders who who see healthcare delivery and leadership through very different lenses. And I think that willingness to seek out other opinions and to learn from other stakeholders is a critical competency for effective leaders. So in closing, physicians are a critical component of effective healthcare and health system leadership. And yes, some are born. Mike Ryan is exactly the same now as he was when we were students. But many more are made through education, training, and experience. And as we seek to move our health systems forward towards greater equity, greater diversity, and better outcomes, we must create educational programming, support professional development, and create a culture of mentorship that enables all physicians the opportunity to lead and the confidence to do so when they get there. Thank you.